ending position of the liftoff and the beginning position of the scoop. One can place the bar at this starting position either from the dead hang or using the liftoff movement. Slowly push the knees forward and under the bar. Continue until the explosion point firmly touches the center of the bar. Keep the arms straight, the wrists flexed, the elbows out, the trilat tuck engaged, and the shoulders over the bar. Freeze at the explosion point. Do not explode and/or extend upwards. When this movement is comfortable, progressively increase the speed of the hips and the impact of the explosion point into the bar. Continue to increase the speed and the force of impact until the hips are literally exploding the thighs into the bar, knocking it away from the body. It is critical that the heels remain flat on the platform during this movement. As the knees are pushed under the bar, the pressure in the feet should not go past the balls of the feet. Practice slowly until this motion is comfortable. Do not skip over this technique. If the heels are allowed to come up now, it can become an unbreakable habit down the road when heavy weights are attempted. Remember, one normally cannot exert maximum force while up on the toes. During the action of the hip thrust, we are discovering and focusing on the speed and explosive power of the hips. This movement occurs because of the unique position of the hamstring muscles. They cross both the knee and the hip joints, causing leg flexion and trunk extension when contracted. The legs were extended during the liftoff by the action of the quadriceps. Once the bar passes the knees, the hamstrings contract and the quadriceps relax, which allows the knees to bend or flex once more, hence the phrase double knee bend. This action of the changing of the guard, so to speak, is the primary reason for the decrease in the upward velocity of the bar. The hip thrust is practiced to decrease this change over time and minimize the time the bar is in this area. For maximum speed of this movement, it helps to visualize the following. Take the explosion point to the bar, not the bar to the explosion point. The hip thrust teaches the big bang technique. Just performing the hip thrust in the lift is poor technique because this action will send the bar flying away from the body. It is practiced initially and from time to time in training to develop and maximize the speed and explosiveness of the hips. Having said this, note that if this movement is not learned first, maximum speed will never be established in the lift. Now we move on to the more sensitive stage of the scoop, the trunk whip. Place a light bar above the knees as before. Begin the movement by slowly extending the trunk. Do not push the knees under the bar. Slowly stand up until the bar touches the explosion point. There should be very little or no impact with the bar. Keep the arms straight, the wrists flexed, the elbows out, the trilat tuck engaged, and the shoulders over the bar. Freeze at the explosion point. Do not jump and/or extend upwards. When this movement is comfortable, progressively increase the speed of the trunk extension until one is standing up with the bar as fast as possible. Once the trunk whip becomes comfortable with a light bar, switch to a regular bar and repeat the whole process. The power of the hips into the bar will be reduced by the trunk extension. The direction of the impact is now more upward than outward. Keep the bar close to the explosion point as if trying to rein in the line of the combined center of gravity. Keep increasing the speed until the body can position the bar from the knees to the explosion point faster than the human eye can follow. Because this distance is so short, incredible speed can be developed. The trunk whip movement focuses on extending the trunk with very little action of the hips. During the hip thrust, one was driving the hips into the bar. During the trunk whip, the idea is to drive or stand up with the bar as fast as possible. In this movement, one will feel the bar coming towards the body more than the body going into the bar. Whereas before one was slamming into the bar at the explosion point, now one turns the big bang technique into a brushing technique. We do not recommend performing the trunk whip motion only during the scoop. Maximum speed and explosiveness will not be developed, and one will not be able to take full advantage of the explosion point to impart more upward velocity to the bar. Now one must combine the hip thrust and the trunk whip movements together to form a solid scooping motion, the flavor of which will be decided by one's preference for either the big bang or brush style. After a solid hip thrust motion is developed, we lean towards more of a brushing style while performing the clean because of the location of the explosion point. However, there are too many individual differences of personality and body types for us to recommend one style over the other. This movement literally becomes a work of art that one will piece together over time. To begin the hip and whip motion, Place a light bar above the knees at the beginning position of the scoop. Slowly push the knees under the bar and drive the hips forward while simultaneously extending the trunk and standing up. When this action is comfortable, progressively increase the speed of the hip and whip motion until the explosion point is contacting the bar. As before, keep the arms straight, the wrists flexed, the elbows out, the trilac tuck engaged, and the shoulders over the bar. Freeze at the explosion point. The momentum upwards created by this motion must be stopped at the explosion point for now. One will feel the body slightly lifted upwards after the brakes have been applied. Nourish and harness this feeling of power, because it will be unleashed into the extension during the next sequence. The difference in the combined action of the hips and trunk is very subtle and is a quality felt more by the athlete than can be coached or analyzed by video. We recommend alternating the bang and brush styles in a set to speed up the process of combining these movements and to find the style for which one is best suited. We stress that one should be very patient while learning this part of the lift. Take the time to perfect this movement because it is the key to lifting heavier weights.